Imagine being able to automate and orchestrate complex workflows with ease. No more manual tasks, no more stress, just seamless execution and monitoring. Sounds too good to be true? Well, today I'm going to introduce state machines and how they can improve your workflow using AWS step functions. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll wonder how you ever manage without them. I'll cover the basics of state machines, why they're so powerful, and how to set one up with AWS step functions. So let's get into it. Alright, let's start with the basics. A state machine is a mathematical abstraction used to design algorithms. Think of it as a system that reads a set of inputs and changes its state according to those inputs. Each state represents a specific condition or status, and each transition represents the action that takes the system from one state to another. It's basically a flowchart where each step is a state and the arrows are transitions triggered by different conditions. And in AWS, state machines are implemented using AWS step functions, which allows you to orchestrate different AWS services into a state machine. And that's basically why it's so powerful. If your architecture is all on AWS, you can orchestrate different services in one state machine and have them interact with each other in one big workflow. AWS step functions makes it easy to build and run state machines that can handle anything from easy workflows to complex business processes. And with step functions, we can create our workflows visually, which makes it very easy and, quite frankly, very fun to create. This not only simplifies our development process, but also makes state machines easier to manage. Now, setting up a state function is very straightforward. Now, let's look at a practical example. Let's say we have a system where we need to process an order. We need to check the inventory first, process the payment, and then ship the order. And here's how we can set that up. This is the state machine workflow builder, or whatever they call it in AWS. We can choose a lot of different actions here. As you can see, it's integrated with a lot of AWS services. Anything from IAM roles to S3 to DynamoDB and Lambdas and everything. And we have different flows as well, where we can add a choice, we can add a parallel, we can add a mapping as well, and the success and fail, of course, at the end. And we can also specify the code for our state machine. So I had some JSON here already that works. We have 3 lambdas here, which is basically our workflow. Check the inventory, process the payment, and ship the order. Now, these can be lambdas, or they can actually just be steps. The easy way is to just implement lambdas and the state will go from one to the other, and we can actually have the logic inside the lambdas. Or we can have, if our inventory is in DynamoDB, we can get item, where basically we say, we can say if the inventory is bigger than 1, then we process the payment. If not, we can go to end. So if the inventory from the get item is bigger than 1, then we can process the payment. If not, we're gonna go to a fail state. And this means that there's no inventory to process the transaction. I would imagine the processing payment is a bit more complicated. We could use some of the actions here. We can make API requests as well, and we can basically find most of it here, I think, depending on what the payment process is for you. If it's a third party like Stripe or something, we can make API calls here and pass the result back to the next step. But I'm gonna leave it as a lambda. We can have all the logic in there for processing a payment and shipping order as well, depending on your business process and your workflow. This can be simple steps here, or it can be a lambda where you have all the logic inside. In this case, I'm gonna leave it to the lambda as well. And I'm gonna add a success at the end, just to show that this has been successfully processed and the state machine will finish successfully. Now, these lambdas need to be created first before we can use them in the state machine. That's why I have the error here, because the RN is not valid. But I don't have any lambdas in my AWS account, but this is where we can choose the lambdas and we can specify next step. There's a lot more we can do. We can filter the input, we can filter the output, we can transform it as well. For example, the get item here, we also need to define the schema or the query we want for our get item, and this in the output we can transform it, we can filter it, but gives a lot of options for each step in here that makes it very easy to build state machines in AWS Step Functions. When it comes to testing state machines, in my experience, that can be a bit difficult. Once a state machine is created, we can run tests for it, or we can actually test the state while creating it. And this is how we can send the input here to the state machine, and we'll see the output and all the different steps it goes through. We can also monitor the input and output of each step, which is very useful. But writing automation tests for our state machines is proving to be difficult in my experience. We can run our state machines locally with AWS Step Function Local, but depending on what resources you use, for example, if you use DynamoDBs or Lambdas or whatever, they can be difficult to run on your local. So it is a bit complicated and not as easy to test or to write automation tests for. But we can test them in the console if that works for your use case. And I've read people having issues with the local tool for step functions. I haven't tried it yet, but I would imagine because we're using Lambdas and DynamoDBs and all the other different AWS services we can use here, it can be difficult to run all of that on your local and test it. And again, we could run end-to-end tests. For example, we can add an API gateway that triggers our state machine, but this would mean if you have any third-party integration, you can't really mock it, and depending on your environments and how all of that is set up, this again might not be helpful. The only thing that I can think of doing is adding unit tests for our lambdas, because these are just basically normal lambdas. We can write unit tests for them and have that unit test run before we deploy. But yeah, that's my experience with testing AWS Step Functions. And AWS likes to describe all of their services as highly available, highly scalable products. And Step Functions is no exception here. Looking through the docs, you'll find highly scalable and highly available written all over. But I found this quotas page where they basically explain the quotas for their state functions. And like I said, most of the steps are probably gonna be other services which have their own limitations. Like if you're using a Lambda, it's gonna have the limitations of the Lambda timeout and like the performance of the Lambda and stuff like that. But these are the quotas of how many state machines you can run on your account and how many state machines you can register. So for example, you can register 10,000 per account, and that can be increased to 25,000. But the one that I found most interesting was the maximum open executions per account. And there's a quota of 1 million executions, open executions. So this means 1 million executions at the same time for your account, which is a big number. But of course, if you work in a big company and your product is very much used, you need to keep these quotas in mind, and they can be increased if, depending on your account, you can get your AWS customer service to increase your quota. But yeah, just keep these in mind whenever you use state machines. And why are state machines useful? Well, state machines allow us to break down complex business logic into manageable workflow steps. And with AWS, the great thing, like I've mentioned multiple times here, is it integrates with all the different AWS services, and they provide built-in error handling, retry logic, monitoring and debugging. And the retry logic is the big one for me. If you have a state machine that fails, you can see all the different states and the inputs and outputs of each step. You can retry each step individually. You can retry the whole state machine. You can have a scenario and just copy it and do some changes and test it. It's very easy to work with, and like I said, it was very fun for me to get into state machines. I got some experience with state machine recently, and it is very fun to use. Very fun to build a workflow like that. And yeah, it's a game changer in my opinion for anyone looking to improve their application's workflow. Yeah, that's been it for this video. If you have any feedback, put down the comments. If you want me to cover anything specifically, again, put down the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all the things for the algorithm. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Happy coding. Bye.